The reading today is from the 1 Samuel 17. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David came to the Philistine. "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord has not saved by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine. He grasped his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him. Then he cut off his head with it. This is the end of the reading. Please stand for the reading of the gospel.
The Gospel lesson. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table. And a woman in the city, who was a sinner, having learned that he was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to bathe his feet with her tears and to dry them with her hair. Then she continued kissing his feet and anointing them with the oil. That's all I got. Okay. Oh, the big book. I see. Okay. That might be it, though. Well, you know the story. He said, people criticized him and said she shouldn't do that, and he said, basically, yeah, her sins are forgiven, so sit down. Okay. It's good to be here this morning, to be with you. I want to congratulate you on your upcoming centennial. I understand that the only person left from that Centennial Committee is Mel. He was around with Martin Luther at the time the church was built. Well, that's what he tells us anyway. I just assumed that was true. Red, isn't that true? Oh, you weren't there either? No, okay. Well, I just wanted to clarify things. It's good to be here for John. I see John's added a TV so he has something to do if he gets bored during the sermon. That's always good to know. I need a little more space here. There we go. A 1,200-pound animal. He's grossly overweight. He's a 5-year-old Siberian tiger, and his name is Goliath. He belongs to the largest species of tigers in the world. Then there's a beetle that measures up to 8 inches long and 2 inches wide. It's called the Goliath beetle. In West Africa, there's a frog that's 11 inches from vent to snout, and then he's called the Goliath frog. And at 287 feet, 1,500 tons, crane that stands on the banks of the River Clyde in Scotland is called Goliath. And the new powerful Pentium processor in the Netherlands is called the Goliath Project. And one of the most popular action figure computer games in Great Britain is called, you guessed it, the Goliath games. People in the secular world may not know Moses, they may not even know Christ, but they know Goliath. At least they know that he was a giant. They may not know how he was brought down, but our text tells us very vividly this morning and graphically how Goliath was killed mano a mano with a scrawny shepherd boy named David. The conventional spin usually casts us as the battle between the giant and the runt, the big guy and the little guy. Now, being one of the bigger guys in society, I don't always like this story. I figure it's kind of unfair to us. But it's a very important story. One modern person says we have too many alpha male Goliaths running amok in the world today. We need more Davids and less Goliaths. Run-of-the-mill runts rather than extraordinary, colossal creatures. However, when we look around us, it's the sharks, it's the Goliaths of the world who seem to prevail all the time, don't they? God seems to delight in fashioning little people who are easy to overlook, but have all the moral integrity to be giant killers. This is what Jesus was talking about when he said, "Those who humble themselves before the Lord will be exalted." And it may be what Paul was saying when he was talking and saying, God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, and what is weak to shame the strong. It's the same thinking that drives the whole Harry Potter phenomenon these days. Who could be a better fictional character, David, than the scrawny little Harry Potter? In fact, he's a powerful little boy who's smart and athletic and kind and virtuous and forced to do battle with evil. Some misguided Christians want to ban him, or at least drive him out of the schools and libraries because they think his powers are some strange spiritual type. Yet his work is close to C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of the Narnia as you can find, which is a profoundly Christian allegory. But I guess I digress a little bit here. The story of David and Goliath is always good drama. And there are various concepts of theology that can be drawn from it. However, there's one major theological theme, one concept that we need to look at. King Saul said to David, "You are just a boy, forget it." His family feared for his life. Even Goliath, when he looked upon David, disdained him. Said, "You're only a youth." He said a lot worse, but it is David, however, who understands what's happening here. The text makes it clear that the conflict is not between the small and the big, or the weak and the strong, but it's between a God-fearing person and a God-sneering person. "You come to me," David said to Goliath, "with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." One has to believe that God would have been just as happy if one of the Hebrew soldiers, any of David's brothers, all of them armed to the teeth, had had the courage to step forward and fight Goliath. But they didn't. David confronted Goliath based on faith and trust in God, not based on his military skills. He didn't front Goliath because he knew he could pick up a stone and hit him at the right place. He confronted him because he knew God was with him, and God would help him to victory. Dr. Bruce Birch, writing the New Interpreter's Bible, says, "The acknowledgement that the Lord does not save us by sword or spear makes us imaginative and resourceful in seeking alternative ways to intimidate the powerful. The contrast in this story is not just between David's God and the nameless gods of the Philistines. It is also between David's faith and the lack of faith by King Saul and all of Israel. They can think of nothing more to do than to imitate poorly the very forces of the oppressive powers they oppose. This story teaches us, hopefully, to endanger trust that the resources of the living God can still be best used for the principles and powers of the world. This is not a passive, inactive position. It requires faithful and trustful speech, courageous confrontation, and the trust that by God's grace, a well-placed stone might prove superior was all it took for David. In a story form, this sounds great. However, many of us have to face evil and oppression with a lot less than a slingshot and stone. How many people of us were willing to walk in the streets of the South in the 60s for civil rights, unarmed? Or in the streets of Belfast in the 90s with unarmed mothers for peace between Catholics and Protestants? Or to stand in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square in the name of peace and freedom? How many of us are willing to risk the shame and anger of our neighbors and family members to stand up for oppressed people today? Be they ethnic people that we sometimes get tired of hearing about, or gay people that we sometimes get tired of seeing on TV, or homeless people we wish would just go away, or handicapped people because they embarrass us, or maybe even mentally ill people because they remind us of how close to the edge we all are. Goliaths, who want to deny that there's anything wrong with our society today, and who want to control everyone else's thinking, run rampant in our fair nation. You know, we all look back at history and we fault Hitler, and rightly so, for wanting to develop a superior race in Germany. But did you know that the very same time here in the United States, that with the support of the Secretary of War and the United States Air Corps, that in 1937, a group of Northwestern conservatives secretly started a project aimed at producing a superior breed of people? Alarmed by the declining U.S. birth rate, and the rising immigration, they were particularly concerned that Americans, true Americans, were not responding enough and reproducing enough. So they wanted to pass the so-called National Endowment. The effort was called the Pioneer Project, but could easily have been called the Goliath Fund. One only has to hear about all of the white supremacy groups that are so popular and so active in our country today to know that the might of the U.S. Army can't even stop them at times. It will take people of faith, of trust, and of courage. People who are willing to step forward and with a slingshot and a few smooth stones of trust and justice to confront the evils and bigotry and hatred of misguided faith. All too often, I'm afraid that I'm more like Goliath than I'm like David. I arm myself to the teeth to do battle and then trust in my own strength and ability instead of trusting in God. And I know that many of you suffer the same fate. Trusting God is one of the hardest parts of faith. It's easy to believe in God. It's easy to intellectually say we believe in God. It's easy to sing about believing in God, to talk about it. But when it comes to actually doing it with our lives, it's much more difficult. To assert the existence of God is one thing. To put our life in front of it is another. In 1968, Dr. Martin Niemöller, a German Protestant theologian speaking before Congress during the civil rights debates, recalled the attitude he and many Germans had regarding Hitler and the evils brought forth before he himself was arrested and imprisoned for speaking out. I'm sure you've heard this before. Dr. Niemöller said, "When Hitler attacked the Jews, I was not a Jew, therefore I was not concerned. And when Hitler attacked the Catholics, I was not a Catholic, so I was not worried. And when Hitler attacked the unions and the industrialists, I was not a member of the union and I was not concerned. Then Hitler attacked me and the Protestant church, and there was nobody left to be concerned." What are the Goliaths we face today? What are the Goliaths you face in your life? What are the things in your life that are bigger than you can handle, that are bigger than you can control, that drive you to the edge? Maybe it's finances. Maybe it's living on a fixed income and looking at a world where prices keep going up and costs keep going up and you don't know how you're going to survive. Maybe that's the Goliath that you're confronted with. Maybe it's health care, realizing that the cost of health care and just the declining ability you have to deal with health is a Goliath you don't know how to confront or what to do with. What are they? What are the things that you'd have to turn loose of? One of the principles of the 12-step program is the fact that as an obsessive compulsive person, you can't control your habits, you can't control your behavior. You have to surrender them. You can only get past them by surrendering them, by letting go of them, not by controlling them. And with faith, we have to surrender to God, not try to control things. We have to learn how to surrender to be able to make a difference in our lives. The world may want Goliath projects. Bigger is better. But God has an ongoing David program that calls on ordinary people of all sizes and colors and shapes, to do extraordinary things, to be concerned with others' hurts, both because of their hurt and because when we allow evil and oppression to run amok, to know no bounds, then we're failing to be the people of God. You know in your heart that you're not a Goliath, that you're a good person. But are you a David? In the ancient battle in the Valley of Palestine, there was no shortage of spectators standing on the side, watching what was going on. I didn't see anybody running out willing to support David. Even those dressed in the armor of God weren't ready to use it. Only one showed up to do God's work. For the 21st century, one may not be enough. We may need more. Amen. Let us stand for our hymn.